Hello, and welcome to this episode of Live with MightyHive on CDPs, privacy, and embracing a first-party data state of mind. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm your host, Roanne Lee, head of the CRM practice at MightyHive, and I'm happy today to welcome Martin Kihn and Chris from Salesforce, and Chris and Steve from MightyHive. As our guests today. So this is a very buzzy topic. Everybody's really interested in learning a ton about this. So I'm really excited to jump right in. To kind of start us off, what we actually wanted to do was kick off with the pop quiz. It's just one question. Feel free to jump into your Zoom and answer that question with a multiple choice. It's completely anonymous, so we have no idea who answered what. So there's no harm in guessing. So give yourself another minute or so to answer those questions. And just as a quick background, I'm going to go through some of the follow-ups that are happening after this webinar. After this webinar, everybody will get a recording of the slides. And so don't feel like you have to take notes and things like that, as well as there's a Q&A option at the bottom of your screen where you can jump in and ask any questions throughout, and we'll make some time to answer those questions at the end of the call. And just as a quick plug on MightyHive, if you are not already familiar with us, we are the leading data and digital media consultancy across the globe, and we offer a ton of marketing and advertising solutions as a service provider to the best tools in the market. One of which is, of course, Salesforce. If you want to jump in and ask us any questions at any point, feel free to email us or go to our website. The other plug I wanted to make is for our panelists who wrote this incredible book on CDPs. If you haven't read it already, you should. And you can actually see a 20-page preview on Google Books that we just linked into the Zoom chat. Feel free to buy it on Amazon as well if you want to learn more after our discussion today. So let's find out what happened with the pop quiz, the quiz results. Amazing. Okay, so it seems like most of us have a really good sense of what CDPs can do. The third answer around CDPs being a platform that unifies customer data from a variety of sources and activates targeted advertising and marketing campaigns is essentially what CDPs do. So going into that a little bit further, we wanted to kind of demystify what CDPs are and the different acronyms that you might see in this space. So the three acronyms we wanted to touch on is CRM, which stands for Customer Relationship Management. And this is where you're storing and organizing most of your first-party data. If we think about DMPs, which stands for Data Management Platform, this is predominantly for storing a lot of that third-party cookie data. And then if you think about customer data platforms themselves, this is actually an amalgamation of the two previous acronyms where you're actually activating on first-party data in a both third-party and first-party sense. To help visualize this really briefly, we put together a really nice, neat metaphor of what it might look like. Obviously, the world is not perfect, but ideally, a CDP would be able to ingest all your data sources, whether it's from CRM or your website or your advertising data, and put it in neat little rows to the right. If we jump into more of a procedural process, it can look like it in 3 steps: from collecting that information, then analyzing that data, and making sure to find the customer journeys that are most meaningful based off of the data that we've been collecting, and then activating against it in both the first party and third party sense, whether it's marketing campaigns, email campaigns, or advertising campaigns. So the other topic we wanted to kind of introduce before jumping to the panelists was why now? Why are CDPs so critical and important today? One of the main reasons that we've noticed a trend, especially in being in the advertising space, is the accountability that we've seen a lot of these brands wanting to see across their supply chain, right? They want to know where those dollars are going, to what people and to what technology vendors, and where all this third-party infrastructure is going. The other reason why now is that, as you already know, the cookie has been in the process of deprecation for a while, both from a hardware perspective, such as what Apple is doing across a bunch of browsers, such as Safari and others, and then also from a third-party ad targeting sense as well, with the announcement that Google is deprecating that. And then, of course, policy and lawmakers have also been opting for more of a consumer-centric approach, making sure that users get to opt in to the data that's being collected about them. The last reason for why now is around these disruptors. We've seen some really new age direct-to-consumer companies pop out of nowhere and do a really great job of connecting their consumer data to the experience that they want to employ for their customers in both upselling them or managing those relationships. So that's another reason why we think that brands are taking an active approach to figure out what to do with their data and employ it to the best of their ability. So jumping over finally to our panelists, this is the perfect storm for us to be talking about CDPs, why taking more control of our data is so important. And I wanted to kick off with Marty for some introductions.
Thanks, Roanne. I'm Martin Kihn. I'm a Senior Vice President of Market Strategy at Salesforce, working primarily within the universe of the Marketing Cloud, which is the suite of ad tech and MarTech products that we offer. I've spent the last couple of years focusing primarily on Customer 360 audiences, which is part of our enterprise CDP. Very happy to be here today.
Yeah, hey Marty, hey Roanne, thanks for having us on, and thanks Chris Martin. I work very closely with Marty. Before I really wrote a book with Marty, I was a big Marty fan because he was a Gartner analyst for a long time and also a frequent contributor to Ad Exchanger. But I focus on product marketing globally for all of our data and identity products. So a big one being the CDP, which we launched probably 8 months ago. So excited to chat about that today, for sure.
And hi, everyone. Sorry. Sorry, Chris. I'm Steve Locke. I'm the Director of Customer Data Strategy at MightyHive. I've been looking after MarTech in various brands for almost the last 10 years, and particularly inside of CDPs in the last 5 or 6 years. I'm now looking after the CDP program at MightyHive.
And I'm Chris Martin, one of the original founders of MightyHive, ex-Yahoo, founded the company with Peter Kim. And of course, in 2018, we merged with S4 Capital, and now a board of director member at S4 Capital. I tend to our media and data pillars at S4 Capital, and CDPs are a very large piece of our data capability. So excited to be here too, and also big fans of both Chris and Marty over the past couple of decades in the industry. So very happy to be here.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for your intros. Just to kick us off, Chris Martin, because we have several Chris's on the line today, I had my take on why first-party data is so important today, what some of the recent events that have happened, but I'm curious from your perspective why companies are choosing to invest now.
Zooming out is a very complex thing to distill into such a small panel, but I'm going to do my best to organize it into a couple of major trends. So as always in marketing, we should start looking at the consumer behavior shifting. And what we see today is consumer behavior shifting from the linear consumption of a definable set of mass media into a sprawling sea of interactive, digitally connected experiences. And this leads to a consumer journey fragmentation and a complexity of execution for the modern marketer that's just untenable. And the modern marketer also needs to connect and orchestrate all of these consumer touchpoints and make sense of them, and then engage across them at scale, which again is just impossible to do without significant automation. So this challenge then, coupled with the accelerating tectonic shifts in privacy regulation, consumer sentiment, and the browser wars, and all of that throws sand into the gears of what we've historically called the third-party data marketplace, online, offline, all of it. It is just very difficult to move data around in the future that we see. So that industry tied together all of those fragmented pieces, and now we can't tie it together anymore. So whammo, the marketer now needs to quickly divest from the current digital marketing methods and begin focusing on how to build all of their new marketing infrastructure, potentially within the enterprise where ultimately the center of truth for consumers is going to have to be in a world where you can't pass around data in a third-party marketplace. So if we were to extend the analogy of data is the new oil, we just assumed that the fuel would always be there whenever we got on a train or a car or a plane. But now we actually have to dig up that fuel and refine it ourselves in our homes and then put it in a jerry can and walk it out to all of those activation points. To be very simple and blunt about it, we have to build that infrastructure in our house. And that for the CMO and the CIO requires investment in data infrastructure, thus giving rise to new platforms and solutions, a spectrum of CDP offerings, which I think your book, Chris and Marty, really highlights very well. There's no single CDP solution. There is a spectrum of solutions that happen to be in growing. And basically, people are looking to solve the data transportability problem in a world of privacy and a broken ecosystem. So those are my thoughts there.
Something I'd add to that, Chris, is it was like that video of the dog. You have the dog kind of going after. I think I know that dog. Anyway, there has been a rise of disruptive new, we call them vendors, companies that have appeared, and they have an advantage in the sense that they are not only new, but they can be agile, they can be nimble, they can be digital first, they can be mobile first, and they're building on top of an infrastructure that in many cases didn't exist when a lot of our customers, who are large global companies, went into business. So a lot of companies out there are, most companies, particularly the very big ones, are dealing with upstarts who do have a kind of seamless, flawless, multi-channel single view of the customer, and they're dealing with a lot of legacy systems and a lot of applications that have built up over many, many years. And so I think a lot of the impetus behind the CDP, customer data platform, as a category is to try to organize that data for these larger companies and mid-sized companies so that they can compete with those disruptors who are going after their cookies or whatever that was.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that logic. So I guess piggybacking off of that, who needs a CDP? Like you said, these larger companies that don't maybe have more fragmented data set, but can you dive into that a little bit more?
It's not only large companies. I think the problem is more acute for large global companies, particularly if they're in multiple regions and there's multiple privacy regimes and they have a lot of legacy systems. And I think we did, Chris and I, when we wrote the book, we did an inventory of RFPs we were getting, requests for proposals for CDP. And about half of them came from retailers. And we thought, well, why retail? And it's because they have a real world presence. So they have point of sale, they have loyalty programs, and they have an online presence, and they're highly disruptible. So there's kind of almost a perfect storm, to overuse the analogy. And then consumer behavior is changing so quickly in retail. And I don't think it's only large retailers who could use a CDP. I think there's all kinds of different CDPs. Just about any company who is trying to do business with people or with accounts on the B2B side needs some single view of their customer, their account. So this solution is applicable anywhere you're doing business, I would say. Yeah.
And Chris O'Hara, do you have anything else to add to that? I'm curious.
No, I think Chris and Marty covered it pretty well. But I guess like one lens you can put on it is like think about 2 years ago before COVID, I think we were kind of on this digital first footing, right? Channel proliferation, people kind of interacting with brands on the time and channel of their choosing, a lot more real time. We started to see things like Dunkin' Donuts built a great app. You could get your coffee and your breakfast sandwich, order it on the app, go through the drive-through and pick it up. And that was kind of a nice to have, and it was great. But then COVID hit, and we kind of went from digital first to digital only because ordering on the app and picking up on the at the drive-through window was the only way you could get a coffee. So we saw like this whole trend Chris described very well earlier just totally accelerate, right? Retailers were closed, they had to go to e-commerce, right? Order online, pick up in store. Consumers started watching a lot more Netflix, where they're getting like perfect show recommendations, right? They're on the internet all the time, perfect search recommendations from Google, like all their friends organized in one place from Facebook. And, big brands who don't have, 10,000 engineers and limitless budgets and all the data about the customers, wanted to deliver this kind of consumer experience, but they're not Google or Facebook. So So what do you do? And I think the CDP came along, and for a lot of enterprises struggling with this problem, they're like, gee, well, maybe this is the solution, like they thought maybe DMPs were 10 years ago. So
yeah, no, absolutely. So I guess before we jump into any more questions, what I did want to do is kind of box this conversation, because sometimes CDPs have a tendency to just bleed into everything. So I guess, Steve, from your perspective, like, what do CDPs not do?
I mean, I would argue that it's more important to understand what it shouldn't do, because there are right tools for the right tasks, right? You wouldn't use your iPad as a cutting board, or you really shouldn't. But honestly, the CDP was born out of a lot of the failed promises of a lot of different systems, that came along that said that they were going to be one ring to rule them all. Whereas a CDP is really around a concept around learning more about your customer marketing data, making some smart guesses on that data of what customers want, and then using it to help them to help find them or help them find you. And so when we enter this kind of world right now where there are a lot of competing systems, obviously, it's not a system of record. It really shouldn't be a system of record. You need data warehousing work, you need architecture work, especially if you're in the enterprise, because even though a CDP can do these things, it's only a light version, right? And so you shouldn't pretend it's your identity and access management either, or your tag manager, even though folks have moved in to that space. So I think it's really sort of like, just use the right tools for the right thing, and don't try to use your phone as a shovel either.
That's a great metaphor. And I guess maybe going off of that, like, let's say we're ready to make the jump and we want to build a CDP or like implement a CDP. Back to kind of Marty and Chris, from your perspective, what does it take to build one? Do you have to do it off the shelf or build it from the ground up from scratch? How does that work?
Actually, I'll mention there's the guy who invented this category, David Robb. He runs the Customer Data Platform Institute. He did a webinar a couple of years ago, and he said CDPs can cure baldness. So they had a picture of him with hair, without hair, and with hair, and he's just kind of playing on this sort of CDPs do everything. It was a good joke, I think. They don't cure baldness. But back to your question. So no, the answer is no, you don't have to build it yourself. Clearly not. There are over 100 vendors now enrolled in the CDP Institute who call themselves CDPs. We have a Salesforce CDP, our competitors have versions. And I would point out that they're all different. So in the spirit of what Steve said, the right tool for the job, there's a lot of due diligence needed to figure out what's the right fit for your situation. But that said, a lot of our customers, this is not the problem isn't new. Everyone's always wanted a single view of the customer. If you talk to CRM vendors back in 1998, they would say, I'm going to give you a single view of your customer, and it'll be available across channels. So it's not a new conversation. It's not a new need. It's not even really a new category. Most of our customers that we deal with, Chris and I, day to day, have some solution already. And it's not necessarily even a vendor. A lot of them have built something on their own, but there's a lot of maintenance, headache, upkeep, et cetera, as our friends at MightyHive know, that goes into that is not really the core at a lot of these companies. It's not their core competency. So that's why somebody might use packaged software instead.
Yeah, I might pile on there. I mean, as Marty said, a lot of big enterprise companies we work with have built one, and that's very possible to do today. I mean, I think the cost of storing and processing data has kind of collapsed at a Moore's law-like rate. It's getting cheaper every day. The amount of kind of off-the-shelf open source software for ingesting data and querying data and doing streaming of the data and egressing data out of the system, it's all available, and it can be put together by really smart developers. And we're seeing, people build with, Snowflake or on Google Cloud Platform, or, with the various tools that are available. Now, as Marty alluded to, the problem there is not necessarily the sort of meat and potatoes plumbing that can be built to support lots of data and mash it together. It's more, it's maintaining all the APIs. And, every time Facebook changes their API, you got to have some developer go in. And you want to maintain like hundreds of these connections, both for data in and data out. And then what also happens is you have to maintain consent. And as data moves through different parts of that system you've built, sometimes there's breakage and there's a very fragile ETL in the middle, and consent is hard to manage in a million places. So I would buy one, not just because I work for Salesforce and we sell one, but I would definitely consider, based on the use case, and ours may not be the right solution, that you work with someone who's willing to do all that crazy development and unleash the power of this thing for a business user, so they can log in and do kind of use cases with it, rather than do technical building of a system, which is not what provides the value.
Yeah, I would add to that and argue that I think the right way to go forward from a more holistic point of view is to build and to buy, but to figure out exactly what to build and what to buy. I kind of harp on the piece around making sure that you do the data warehousing piece, the architectural piece, and you should build the things that are going to help you as a brand, as a company, own the data that you are responsible for, especially in a privacy first kind of future. And buy the pieces that, to your point, Chris and Martin, the maintenance and upkeep is it's a multiplicative, kind of thing, right? You've got one API in, one API out, times how many, that are moving through the system. So, I think understanding and if you don't have the people to internally to help you understand exactly what you should actually put effort towards and money towards, I think that's where, expert advice is super important.
Yeah, that's true, Steve. And I should mention that it's a great quote by David Robb we got in the book. He said every enterprise infrastructure drawing will have a box that says CDP on it. And of course, that's going to live alongside what you're doing in warehouses and your overall infrastructure. So I think your point is well taken.
But we don't want to overstate how mature the category is. I mean, it's and in Gartner terms, I guess we'd say it's nascent. It's sort of emerging still, and it's developing fast. But I think it's perfectly possible to have the solution that's right for your enterprise be 3 different things, that all of which call themselves a CDP, but they all do slightly different parts of your stack, and they fulfill unique needs. And so we would just counsel, don't get wrapped up in what something calls itself. Look at what it's used for and what it's useful for. And in today's world, I mean, there are distinctions among CDPs, and you can have multiple, including something that you built, as Steve said, in the stack. Yeah.
That's really helpful. So I'm going to ask a question that maybe a lot of our audience members have right now, is they're probably thinking about going on the CDP journey themselves. And so if they were to do it, let's say build it and buy a few resources that's good for their company, how would you recommend they prepare? What do they need to do first? That's for you, Steve. Sorry.
Oh, it's for me. I think it's really important to get a good understanding, as there's an understanding of today of what the market looks like. Marty, to your point exactly, the industry moves very quickly and has been developing so fast. I mean, we even rewind just a year and we've got new players, we've got players who have been bought, we have, folks that have reclassed themselves. So that's, one, huge aspect is, do what you can to take advantage of the resources that exist, from books to articles, et cetera, from good sources, probably everyone in this call, and, educate yourself, and don't, sort of over-engineer it, at first as to what you need. And that second point is, CDPs across the board are complex because they solve so many different types of use cases. And so you've got to do the work to figure out what your use cases are. right? You don't have to do all of them, right? But to prepare, think about what the primary use case is. What does your company do to drive revenue? How do you make money? Do you need something that's about efficiency, or do you need something that's really about growth? There's so many aspects of it. If you can walk away, strategize, this is what we actually need, here's the biggest gap, then actually look for one of the the three broad types of non-marketing suite CDPs out there. You can look for a CDP that focuses on customer data expansion, or you could focus on one that's focused on resolution, or you could focus on one that's about activation. And knowing where you need to go with that will narrow the market down, tremendously, and just give you an idea of what to look for and what to listen to.
That's a great point, Steve. I'll mention Marty tells a great story up front in the book about our friend Art Sebastian. And Art's the head of digital for Casey's. And I never heard of Casey's. It's a Midwest retailer. They have gas stations, convenience stores, and they're the fifth largest pizza retailer in America. Never heard of them, but apparently their pizza is
delicious
amazing.
Pizza, really good.
Yeah. So Art kept it simple. He has like 20 different use cases he's rolling out, but the first one was, he's got a ton of point of sale data, right? What pizzas people buy in the store. He's got a ton of email data in Salesforce Marketing Cloud. And all the guy wanted to do was like, what if we just showed people the pizza they normally buy at our store in our promotional email, like get 10% off? And like connecting that data from the store to his Marketing Cloud data was such a problem. And so it was just like a brutal exercise of having to ask IT and write queries and get the data here and then prep it and clean it and transform it and put it in the email system. When he got the CDP and they started literally activating that use case right away, I don't know, Marty, you can correct me, but something like a 30 to 40% lift in his email campaigns, selling a ton more pizzas. And all he did was, use one little bit of data to do something different in email. And obviously you can let your imagination run from there. But I mean, once, as Steve, as you said, once you identify exactly what you want to do, it becomes obvious sort of what your roadmap might be.
Yeah. And it might even might sound trivial, but we use that example. It's very telling. It gets to what Ro was asking earlier. Where do you start? Start with something that's very clearly defined, but that you can't do today. It's something that it's just almost like a no-brainer. Put the right pizza in the email. It's a better customer experience. We know it's going to work. I mean, there's no way it couldn't work. So start with that, and then then you get into the situation where you're looking at your data dictionaries. You're trying to see if you have good documentation. Who owns the data? Do they know each other? Can they work together? All that kind of stuff comes out of this focusing on a simple use case. So a good place to start is something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would add when we think about big enterprises and we're talking about being digital only and looking at the disruptors. Large brands can take a look at the disruptors right now and say, hey, they're able to do this right off the bat. They're doing it better than us. They're providing these direct to consumer experiences, and they're answering the expectations that consumers have today. And that in itself is a great place to go when you're thinking about FMCG. We're thinking about CPG. How do I do that? Well, I want to get over there. Right, use that as a compass and a north point.
Yeah, I love the idea of using competitors as, hey, they're doing this and I want to be able to replicate that. That's a great use case.
I think the wrong place to start is to say, I need a single view of my customer. I just need a single view. Yeah. And as Chris and I know, when we did the book, we're like, the next question is, well, what would you do if you had it? And often there's an awkward silence. They're sort of like, not sure.
That's really funny. Okay, so I guess one of the things that I think, this is honestly a very basic question, but I just wanted to be able to ask it around, hey, let's say there's data like repetition in terms of the data sets that we're piping in, especially if you're bringing it in from many different sources. And so if you had, like, for example, multiple emails or the same email repeated or things like that, what would a CDP do in order to solve those types of tricky problems?
Yeah, I could start with this one. I mean, there's really two ways to think about this. At its most basic, if you have a lot of known data in the system, could be 20 Chris O'Hara's in 20 different databases with maybe Yahoo, a Gmail, and a couple of work addresses that I want to reconcile together and make all those contacts a rich profile. So I have this sort of global party ID or kind of federated ID that represents Chris O'Hara. So that's really what we call customer resolution. But that can also include, if you think about it, the way I'm identified in social media might be a social media handle. The way I'm identified in a commerce system might be my mail to address. The way I'm identified in like a call center software is probably my primary phone number. So we have to be able to take all that known data and stitch it together to the ID. And then on the other side of that is the more sort of complex problem of cross-device identity. I have 30 different cookies, and I have 2 mobile phones, and a desktop, and a laptop, and a tablet, and a Roku device. And all of those have, unique IDs, and I want to be able to know that Chris O'Hara on, his tablet is the same guy on the desktop as the same guy watching, streaming something on Xbox. So there's really 2 parts to that problem. It's very complex, but I guess at a high level, if you can provision that identity spine, and that identity spine runs across the organization, that's where you sort of start to get that single source of truth, which is, foundational to the CDP, because as I think Chris Martin mentioned right up front, we've acquired over time as companies, you buy your CRM, and then you buy a loyalty platform, then I buy a call center software, then I buy a DMP, and now I'm buying a CDP. And you're actually just creating a lot of duplicative data over time that eventually needs to, to come together in one place. So
I think that kind of identity management, deduplication, and mapping of ID A to ID B is one of the core kind of capabilities of a CDP. It's something that they're expected to do in one way or another. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that also like a good CDP will help preserve the context around each of those IDs also, and the activity around them, because we want to compress, obviously, right? All the data that we have around an ID or a profile, but understanding how somebody sort of behaves, let's see, in an Xbox gaming situation is going to be really different than what they sort of prefer from their spa treatments. And so knowing like where these actual IDs are operating and the context for all those is I think one of those real key things that a CDP can help solve and unlock and get us towards better relevancy.
Great, that's really exciting to hear. So I guess for Chris Martin, really quickly, what would the role of a service partner play in a successful CDP implementation? Obviously, we are one, and we've seen a few of these kind of play out, and I'm curious what critical role we would be able to play.
Yeah, I look at CDPs as the same place where back in the day you had supply chain companies. Back in the 1980s and 90s, reinventing manufacturing, eliminating fat, bringing data together across enterprise. It sounds very familiar. And ultimately what you end up seeing is the rise of the ERP platforms, the Salesforces, the Oracles, the SAPs. This is how you factor and automate the enterprise functioning of your company. And one of the clunky parts of the full supply chain has always been marketing, right? You'd always have to go to your agency partners, or you'd have to go to an outside world or an expert in order to effectively optimize that closed loop supply chain. And so I think a lot of people don't realize this, or at least I see it for the future. And again, we're getting out of the now, but I'm thinking 10 years from now. I look at CDPs in a way as being the data bus of the enterprise of the future. And I would not just localize it to marketing. I would bring it into things like supply chain decisioning. So if I have a lot of demand for one thing, how do I make sure that it's manufactured correctly and in the right product styles, et cetera? So there's a data bus being formed here, and it just happens to start with marketing. And in that type of thinking, where you've got a platform that needs to be implemented across every company in the Global 1000, or as Marty and Chris said, it's really every company needs some form of this. If you look at it conceptually, it is a data bus. That requires an entire services ecosystem of expertise in thought leadership, data activation, business process definition, staff augmentation training, vertical brand industry expertise, middleware, maintenance, future-proofing, agility, and agnosticism. So you're finding the right solutions, not necessarily the things that I sell to you. That is where the services layer comes in. And if you look at MightyHive's core message and what S4 is now really pushing for both digital media and data and our content business, there is a spectrum of control that the modern marketer and the enterprise is going to need, where some things are going to be core to their business and they need it to be in their infrastructure. That requires change management, project management, consulting, technical expertise, which you're not going to hire as a marketer. You need to ramp up, invest, and then bring it down. And then on the other side of that spectrum of bringing it in-house is relying on the pieces from the outside industry to bring it to you, because it's not going to be your core competency. And that will require managed services and ongoing support. So I think there is an enormous opportunity for a services ecosystem to grow around this concept of a data bus in the modern organization, starting from marketing and eating its way through the rest of the enterprise. But again, I'm future spitballing a little bit, but I've seen this story before in another area.
Not so much.
I love that.
The
Yeah,
bus,
go ahead,
yeah,
Marty.
we're on
I
the
love
bus.
We're on the bus, man.
But the whole idea of it being beyond marketing, I mean, I think we see that every day. And in fact, the concept of business transformation, people outside marketing talk about it. It's almost similar to what's happening in marketing. Marketing's trying to de-silo. So you have a single view of your customer, and you want the email team, the web team, the mobile team all to work together, social team. So you can deliver a better experience. And that's happening across the enterprise. Service and marketing need to work more closely together. And the best companies that we know, have them kind of buttoned up. So if someone has an open case and they're complaining about how much they hate you, don't send them an email about how great you are, and how much money they can save. So it's just stuff like that, having the enterprise itself work together, different departments. All of that will be supported by a CDP-like object, I think, or a platform.
Yeah, I'd agree with Marty. And just to enhance what you said, Chris, Martin, Marty and I are talking to a lot of big companies all the time, and no matter how sophisticated, you're surprised that a lot of them kind of don't undertake the center of excellence approach, right? You have to have alignment between IT and the media team and the analytics team, and all that has to be very tightly, aligned, right? Because the analytics team is going to do the segmentation and figure out your KPIs, and the IT team is going to manage the infrastructure and the governance and make sure, whatever vendor you're bringing in for this or that is compliant. And then the media team is going to, activate activate that data out of the system, and they all have to work together. But where, for us, partners can come in and kind of be the Sherpa to guide, what's the RACI model for deploying this digital transformation? What's that vendor ecosystem look like? How do you work among all these vendors? What's the strategy, right? And, I think it's very hard to do without a really good partner today. And, the ones we've seen implemented the right way do have very strong partnerships with their agency and with their strategy agency, and it's definitely the way to go. It's too complex to unpack internally, and I think sometimes you see a lot of politics get in the way of a transformation, right? Where the agency can step in and say, no, we agreed on the strategy, and you have to play nice between media and IT to make these use cases work, right?
And to follow it up, the conversation that we're having with customers is no longer about an agency of record, or who can I bring in to help me with all these problems. It's about who's going to be the data partner of record, because it's not just about media anymore. It's about managing the intelligence and insights that are harvested out of the data silos from within the enterprise. And it is really difficult to find people who have 20 years of experience doing things like that. So you're going to have to rely on centralized services partners for a while until this becomes the household staple thing that, just like you guys said, it will be the box in every systems architecture planning for the enterprise in the future. Good times for services partners. And I look forward to Salesforce's ecosystem growing in this space too, on the services side.
That actually segues really perfectly into my next question. We're all marketers here in this room, and I'm sure amongst the audience. What does the future hold for all of us? How will our jobs shift? What sorts of changes will consumers see because we're shifting our talents and skills, and looking at the data differently, looking at the KPIs differently once CDPs are fully implemented?
I think it's one of the most interesting and I think unpredictable things that happened to marketing in the past 20 years is how reliant it's become on data scientists and statistics and kind of deep analytics. And I think that when I was at Gartner, like 3-4 years ago, we're looking at what CMOs were investing in, and it was really analytics was an outsized portion of that, and it was growing faster than anything else. And it wasn't just hiring PhDs in data science. That's not what I mean, but it's people who are comfortable with data. So data engineers, data processing, data mungers, data analysts, that component of marketing has become absolutely critical. So I think that one thing we can say is there's going to be increasing automation. The past is the future. A lot of tasks that today are routine will be automated. And then there'll be a lot more kind of predictive modeling going on. So consumers will see things that are more relevant, that are almost uncanny, but in a way it reflects what they're experiencing elsewhere. So it won't seem that weird, but the machines will be meeting us halfway more and more. And I think, what are the people going to be doing? Well, the people are going to be very comfortable, as young people are today, using technology as part of their business and using data as part of their business. That doesn't mean creatives go away. Creatives they do what they always do, which is, being creative and communicating with other human beings through creative media. That continues. So I think that we become more of what we are today, which is data savvy. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add to that. That's a really great point, Marty. And I think about a story we tell in the book, which is, Google has this really amazing library of algorithms called TensorFlow, right? And they do various things, but they're all essentially algorithms, and they actually, it's a genius level library of stuff, and they actually give it away for free. Like, geez, why would Google give away this this IP for free to every single developer in Silicon Valley in the world? And the reason is simply that the algorithms need like a gigantic scale of data to be able to perform well, right? So you need unified data with a lot of truth and fidelity inside it, reconciled data, and you need that data to be at scale. So Google was smart because they knew, their algorithms would be more successful if they ran on this massive amount of data. And if you think of how that applies to marketing, analytics gets better when it's running on a rich, unified set of data. Segmentation, whether you're just building segments for analytics or you're building segments to activate in media, gets super smart when you can add loyalty points and lifetime value scores and propensity models and media interaction data to a segment. So as Marty said, like, if you want to get into marketing today and be successful, definitely got to be a little bit of a data geek to get what's happening.
And and I want to add, looking at the future, privacy will change, not just the way that we're talking about, how we class data between one party versus another. We have to think about privacy in the workflow too, and that's going to impact everyone that is touching the data at all. CDP can help surface data at a brand to work on privately. You can work on these inside the walls of the brand so it can be safely operated on. And folks are going to have to understand what privacy means to them from a day-to-day basis. And so as we go into the future, we do have some of these tools that are going to enable us to operate in a very brand safe and personally data safe kind of way. But that's going to be a huge kind of shift as we're going forward as to what our day-to-days look like.
I think to everybody's point, I think a lot of brands and especially advertisers are having a little bit of a moment where it's like, oh, my security blanket with all that third-party data is going away and I feel really naked, right? And so I really appreciate everybody's point that there's still a way to centralize and amalgamate all of that information in obviously an anonymous and safe way that still employs algorithms and other ways that we can make the marketing experience better. It's just not going to be with cookies, which is a good thing overall. So I just wanted to make one plug before we jumped into one last question with this group of more Q&A questions. I love the two that are already up here, so feel free to jump in and add a couple more. I'd love to stump one of them, and that would be really fun to see live. So the last question I wanted to offer is more of a hypothetical. So let's say I'm a consumer durable goods brand that decides to implement a CDP. I have a little bit of a MarTech thing, a little bit of an ad tech stack going. I won't specify what, but I've never had like a full CDP solution. And I know there's customer data in silos that's not quite connected or cleaned up together. Can you, and this is like broadly, maybe more for the product side of things, can you walk us through some steps? And I know we kind of talked about the preparation of installing a CDP, but I really want some kind of structure around the steps that you would take to prepare, build, and activate a CDP.
I would have a brainstorm session. I would start again, as we said before, with the use case. So if just say you had organized your customer data, what would you do with it? Start there. And so you'd have all your great thinkers and everyone who knows the customer really well, and people from the call center, and they'd be like, not little things, like, something significant. So then, all right, so I have my use case, as we'll say. Then I have to figure out what systems are involved. So then you get the data engineers, people from IT. And the next step is always a data audit. It's what data do I have? How well documented is it? What shape is it in? What are the sources of that data? How frequently is it refreshed? And who owns it? So it's a kind of a replicable process that your friends at MightyHive no doubt can take you through. So then you'll have a kind of an audit. Hopefully you'll say, all right, the data model was beautifully put together because the IT team is excellent. It's extremely well documented. It's refreshed all the time and the fields are very clear. So then it's really just a mapping exercise within either a home built or an off the shelf package CDP where you're mapping the fields together and you're doing identity management. Most likely that's not the situation. Most likely you have a mess on your hands. And so then you have to figure out, all right, which data is most important? And can we call up the guy who left 2 years ago who actually knows what form it's in and can tell us where the documentation, this is just reality, unfortunately. But that's to say, it all starts from the use case and it starts from then identifying the sources of data. The last step is in a way the easiest one, which is then doing mapping and doing activation and logging into your CDP. The hard part is the upfront part. And internal politics, you can't overstate the fact that people own data and data is power, and a lot of people don't want to give it up. Agencies and also people in your team. So,
Ro, can I tackle some of this and actually like address one of the other Q&A questions at the same time, where someone's asking about new customers, right? So if you're trying to approach this from a new perspective, or like, how do I get in there, right? How do I make the cases, and what do I need right now? I mean, obviously, you started off talking about, death of the cookie and what that really looks like. The thing is, we can use, well, we have to all understand, marketers, data folks, et cetera, alike, is that, the winds are moving towards more privacy, period, right? We all, I think, probably agree on that. We have to understand, like, when we're looking at Google, who owns 70%-ish of the browser, ecosystem, they're very supportive of first-party data onboarding, but they're not supportive of the third-party ecosystem, right? We have to understand that. And then secondly, you've got folks on the outside who are working on alternative IDs, unified ID, LiveRamp IDs, et cetera, because they're trying to build these other walled gardens outside. You can use the CDP now to talk about, my company needs a first-party data strategy, a second-party data strategy, a third-party data strategy. And I can use a CDP to help unlock some of those things and address some of the questions of, I'm really worried about how to get new customers. I'm really worried about how to reach any of these folks, or maybe a drop off in addressability in traffic, right, into the future. And if you're looking at, we're going to have to split that up. Maybe first party strategy is really around helping to use all of the earned customer data that you've got to seed audiences out into the Facebooks and the Googles, folks and that you're using today to try and leverage in a very easy way. You can leverage a CDP to actually model those audiences internally and then push those out so that you can continue to do things like lookalike targeting and act-alike targeting. From a second party perspective, we're thinking about walled gardens, whether it's Flock or Fledge or, many other avian, types of, considerations of what this looks like. A CDP can also help you to mitigate some of your acquisition and reach drops by actually looking at CDP matched audiences on the outside into Facebook or what Flock will be, which is another walled garden. And then third party audiences, CDP audiences can help you essentially participate in the marketplace for all of these other ID middlemen that exist. You can start to create buckets to actually capture the people that you'd normally try to maybe go into an interface and be able to model out an audience you could buy in the third party. Instead, you're going to have to draw people over. And if you can use a CDP here to actually kind of flip the script, determine the kind of audiences that you care about, and use them as a kind of a filtering mechanism, to catch folks to help mitigate and possibly even increase the kinds of people that you can reach. Sorry, that was a bit.
I think to your point, a lot of times media acquisition takes the perspective of boiling the ocean first, rather than starting with the data that you have already. And so I really appreciate that perspective. So Steve jumped the gun and walked through our Q&A questions already. The first question that he was answering just now was, how can CDPs help in finding new customers, as we're seeing more and more targeting restrictions from media buying platforms like Google and Facebook? Presumably, we've kind of answered that question, so hopefully we feel good about that. I wanted to jump into the next one. The next one is by Brittany. She asked, CDPs are typically really expensive. We've had a few of these investment questions. For advertisers who can't afford the investment, what else should they be doing to prepare their first-party data strategy? Do they build it in-house potentially? I'll open that up to the floor.
I would answer the first part of that question around expensive being, how expensive is it for your company to churn through really angry customers who leave you because,
That's a great point.
they tweeted you and then they emailed you and then they called the call center and you had to give your name and address and order number 3 times to return a pair of shoes. And you know what? Consumers are not having that anymore because of this high expectation they have. So I think you have to think about it as, of course you think about, new customer acquisition, but I think retention is a big part of it. I was in the DMP industry for a long time, and we always thought with DMPs, wow, you could do all this aggressive targeting, you could put 15 different data attributes and really get the perfect segment built so it'll perform well. And the main use case for the DMP was actually just ad suppression. We realized people were seeing too many ads, and instead of seeing 400, they could see 4, and marketers saved a lot of money doing that. So I don't know, I'll defer to Marty on the second part because he's a little more technical than I am. I don't know. I think there are CDPs out there that are quite affordable, actually, including ours.
Including ours, affordable. Yeah. It depends. Yeah, it depends. I mean, it depends what expensive means. But I would say the important part is, what is your first party data strategy? What are your sources of data? And what are the challenges that you're having? Is it identity management? So you could peel off a part of it and then maybe look at a vendor who only does that. So it maps identity A and identity B. Is it really data enrichment? So then you want to go to somebody who provides third party data that can enrich your profiles. It may be that if you want to really, just have somewhere to store the single view of the customer, which is pretty well formatted, that's pretty easy. You can go to any one of the big clouds, Google, Amazon, Azure, and store your data. And they also have a lot of other services you can use. So I would say start on the analytics side, with a conversation with your data science team and figure out, what shape your data is in and what you really need, like where you're going to need help from a vendor. And it may be that you don't need a big CDP kind of big bang. You could make do with other point solutions.
Yeah, so that actually gets into Jared's question about, hey, how do you calculate and make the case for a CDP investment? And I like how everybody kind of framed it around, hey, what are the problems or the use case that you're trying to solve for? And you can probably calculate out how big of a waste not having a CDP generates, whether it's thinking about it from a customer service perspective and all the unhappy customers, or some other part of the experience right now that's not digitally connected, which requires a lot of really negative experiences and things like that. So I really like that as well. Anything else we want to add to the question around how to convince the executives to invest in a CDP?
I was just going to say, I think there's some obvious ROI benefits from unifying your data. Like we've always had a lot of email marketers in Salesforce Marketing Cloud, and we're probably, I think, the #1 sender of emails in the world. So a lot of our customers, they do a little bit of targeting with email, but a lot of them are what we call batch and blast. They're just sending out massive emails from really massive lists of people who've bought before or prospects or signed up. And they get a certain percentage of people who open those emails, and then they get a certain percentage who come to the site and a certain percentage who convert. When I think about the basic opportunity is if I can take, past purchase data, loyalty data, maybe some data from my CRM, build a really smart segment, and supercharge that contact list, I'm going to get a lot more people to open my email. If I can, combine that with a relevant experience when I click on that email and go to the website, I'm going to get lift on purchase there, and I'm going to convert more. I'm going to sell more. And, specific to email, this stuff is very easy to measure historically. So if I'm going from 5% open rate to a 10% open rate, I can show my CFO exactly what that means in terms of numbers. And obviously, email's the simple example, but of course you get into display and social media advertising and different tactics. It gets more complex, but that's the basis of the analysis.
And I think that also kind of answers a question that just came in around how long does it take from CDP implementation to actually seeing the benefits? Is there a long-ish lead time or not? And it kind of depends on the activation, right? If you send an email right after you implement your CDP and have a really great audience segment, you might see it pretty immediately, but the benefits kind of add on top of each other as journeys are activated over time, right?
There's a learning curve. I think if you're implementing simple rules, so like in the pizza example, so that it really is a simple rule. It's like, what's the most common pizza this person's bought? Put that image in the email. That can happen quickly once you have the system running. If you're actually using it to train models on, that training time, it takes time to kind of get a good neural network up and running. So that would be 2-3 months before you start seeing any results. Yeah.
Awesome. So
3 months is safe.
Great. 3
Yeah,
months.
I've always think, I use a sort of number about 12 weeks, to get to value. Stuff that's shorter probably isn't, big enough to get, executives to actually notice and care. But if you choose something that's going to look, get you to really good value in about 12 weeks would be good.
Awesome. So last question for the day. I know, actually, maybe I should let everybody go, but last question was around the CPG industry. I think this is like one of those examples where Chris O'Hara started today's session around, hey, we had to be a digital only kind of globe with COVID hitting. But for CPG companies where people are still buying products in a physical retail sense, and they don't have a ton of data because there's so many intermediaries in between them and that data set, what is the case for a CDP? And maybe Chris Martin also wants to talk about our Mondelez use case and things like that, but I'll let, yeah.
Well, I can start. I'm sure Chris Martin has some more compelling examples. But Marty and I were on the phone with a gigantic global beer company the other day, and they've been talking to their colleagues in CPG, other companies, fashion companies, other CPG companies, and they know that between them, they probably have more data than Google and Facebook combined, because they're global, billions of customers, lots of data. And one of the ideas, it's been around for a while, but I think is really compelling, is what if they could create a data consortium, all, opted in data, privacy-led, a trusted framework, and sort of share data, non-competitively among one another. And that solves the problem of all this third-party data, marketplace data has gone away. So it really becomes this big second-party data marketplace. But at the end of the day, they're losing the normal way they've achieved scale, with marketplace-based third-party cookie data, and now they have to turn to partners and unlock very interesting bespoke relationships with people willing to share consented in data. So it's going to be difficult, but it's a good challenge, and I think it's the right time to do it.
I think there should be CPGs really need to look at content and whether that's through partnership or the uses of their products, to actually drive some of the digital engagement around their brands. If your food, for example, recipes, become a really, really key part of what a CPG can start to actually develop in terms of a content relationship with them. And CDPs work really well in this space for looking at content recommendations, for those folks. And that's how you can start to personalize and create a direct relationship, from products that are usually sold through other channels.
Great. Or Chris, you want to go?
Yeah, so I'm not going to dive specifically into the Mondelez case study. However, if anybody has questions, they're more than welcome to reach out afterwards. But there's case studies available on the open internet, and I think that's good to start. But in general, the concept for a CPG or a data poor company or data challenge company, where they don't necessarily have a lot of direct relationships with consumers, am I going to have a direct relationship with my Oreos? Probably not, but am I going to have a direct relationships with my athletic lifestyle and eating habits, or how I entertain people at home? Those are the types of questions that I would start asking. And that's where your data collection starts, building experiences or building lifestyle or partnering or coming up with distribution channel partnerships that allow you to harvest first-party data, consented first-party data that makes sense. That builds a seed audience. That seed audience is then going to be mixed with a ton of second-party and third-party data in the future, which might not be deterministic data. It might be something a little bit more like signals. This geo, this behavioral segment, this linear time of day, who knows what it is, but those signals can be brought into a CDP. You can take non-deterministic data and think about them more as cohorts or large groups and align those with the activation channels, use your first-party data that you do know a lot about, and then leverage them across a much larger data signal, data bus into your activation points. You have to start somewhere though. You should have some type of DTC or some type of relationship directly with consumers so you can learn a lot more. But you start that intelligence small and continue to grow it and grow it and grow it and grow it. I think if you do have a relationship with your cookies, perhaps you go to a retail store similar to the Apple store, where you go in and have a cookie experience. And you might not have many of them, but that loyalty program is a start. So I think there's, again, a spectrum of conversations that you'll have around the types of data that you can build as a data poor company starting from zero. But there's a lot of service partners out there that can help you. And we're certainly happy to have that conversation and talk about those use cases if you have more questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much to the panelists and to our audience for jumping in and answering all of these questions. I hope there were even more questions that you guys thought of. And like Chris just said, please feel free to send them our way. We really appreciate the time, and everybody will get a recording of this at the end. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Roanne.
Thank you all.
Great
Yeah.
time,
Thanks,
guys.
guys.
Thank
Bye.
you
Yes.
so much.